Fang. He's a character. I can't tell you much about him in the Noctopath trilogy because he hasn't really been there much. I can't spoiler what he's done. Well, I could. I'm not going to, though. Some people don't like that, and I'm going to respect that. Besides, if you're curious about him and want to know what type of role he plays in this trilogy, by all means, purchase them and find out. This is more about his backstory, the lore of the creation of a character. Fang is probably one of the closest characters to my heart. He's been with me the longest. By that I mean he was the very first character I ever created. He's been with me since I was a 10-year-old kid writing stories in spiral notebooks, composition books, and more. He was my avatar into the world of fiction. There's a story in and of itself there. How'd that start? When I was 10 years old, I remember always being fascinated by television, by video games, anime, cartoons, movies, and more. I am a child of the 90s, and 90s television will always stay with me until they put me into the ground. Like many kids, I'd play pretend on the playground. We'd pretend we were a part of our favorite shows. But I wasn't too extroverted. I didn't get to do it a lot. And honestly, playing with other people really made me nervous, despite sometimes wanting to or trying to. It's weird. And it's hard to remember back then sometimes, but some memories are clearer than others. Anyways, I remember trying to get into writing from a very young age. I remember always wanting to get into making a story for myself, to go to new worlds, to leave this place. If only I could do that on paper. To be part of like this grand adventure. So when I was gifted for my 10th birthday by family a notebook, particularly this one, he's a race car guy, I guess. I have no idea who he is. One of my grandparents got it for me. I didn't really have a use for it, though, until I decided, let's make a story. And the very first incarnation of Fang was born. He wasn't always called Fang, though. He was called Grip, or Grip Roller. Why Grip? It was the name of a brand of pens I had been gifted at the same time as this notebook. I ended up putting it up for a few years, like putting this away after I filed through most of these. As you can see, I went through different colored pens. This is the end of this pen. This is the start of a new one. Then I'm into another one. Then I ran out of that. I'm now on green ink. But when I was about halfway through this, I put it up for a few years. I had picked up a PS2 for Christmas, played some games. We moved houses, states. Settling into the new place, I didn't really have many friends, if any. I kept mostly to myself, and I once again returned to the world of writing in composition notebooks. I expanded upon the story I had just been screwing around with. Fang, or Grip at the time, as my avatar character, I wrote him into other shows or cartoons. I would rewrite the endings. I would just have him hang out with characters I loved from these shows. I formed my own storylines. I guess you could say this was what people called fan fiction. eventually I brought characters from these other shows into other worlds, until Fang had formed something like a party. For copyright's sake, I'm not going to name what stories I went into or what characters I met there, but needless to say, over a very long period of time, from age 10 to 14, very long to me at the time. It might not be very long anymore, but I went through all of these. I crafted a story that really was a hobby at the time. I had no idea what I was making, but over time, I was evolving Fang into the character he would one day become. I was creating new characters, original characters. I was doing away with going to these pre-created worlds from the cartoons or anime or a video game world. I was doing away with that and started creating my own storylines. I was going into my own worlds. And before I knew it, Fang had evolved into something far more than just an avatar. And this had evolved far more into just a hobby. There's a lot of these here. And I've got another box full of these. I don't want to have to keep pulling them out and wasting your time. But if you're interested in these, I might make another video about them later. But needless to say, this was a long, arduous hobby that eventually spread into something far more. I knew I had something on my hands, but I didn't know where I could take it. Then I found a role-playing group with some old buddies I met on some social media. Role-playing is kinda like fanfiction, but with some Dungeons and Dragons spin-off to it, I guess. You, take your character, you take other people's characters, and you merge them together, and you form your own story. It's a lot like Dungeons and Dragons without the dice and the Dungeon Master, though there might be a Dungeon Master sometimes, depending upon what your group's rules are. But it was mostly my group, so it was my rules. Fang was one of the characters I brought out of these books and put into the new shtick. I remodeled him many times. I molded him over the course of a decade into what he would eventually be today. He's in the background in this trilogy, though. Surprisingly, you'd think the main character would be like somebody that close to me would have to. Why wouldn't he be the main character? Why choose Central? Well, I wanted to start small. I didn't want to Metroid Fang to level 1 or something and start the story from way in the back, because that would take a long time. I wouldn't want to go all the way from the start to Central, because if I did that, nobody would care about Central when I got to him. And I care about Central. I started here because this was the first season of a prototype of the roleplay. I've said this many times before, but that first season is one season that Fang was a minor character in. He was the main character of another season. Season 0, Season -1, Season -2. And he's been around. And because Fang is, in video game terms, if I were to say Setchel is level 20, Fang is max level 999, whatever level cap you want to give to your video game, that was where Fang was at the time of the Season 1. He's been around for a while. And I didn't want to start with just a Superman type character. I wanted to start with Superman in Smallville. So that was Setchel. I wanted someone who would be a little bit mentorish, a bit experienced, having been around for a while, so they could be a mentor for Pike and the others, but not be as OP as Fang would be. Setchel is the perfect fit for this story. Fang will find his fit later. I felt that he needed a lore video. I needed to tell this early story because Fang and his story is part of the reason I'm doing this today. I owe a lot to this notebook right here. Thanks for watching.